Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here today to actually accentuate what has been taught by Daniel Tigrai on how Ethiopia can't use sports in Eritrea. Okay, we know two countries, Eritrea and Ethiopia, are neighbors, and Ethiopia is a landlocked country, and Eritrea has access to the sea of its own. Now, how can Ethiopia access the seas? Okay, through its neighbors. One is Sudan, of course, as you know. From the map right here, that Ethiopia can actually access the Red Sea from Sudan or from Eritrea, from Djibouti, from Somalia. Basically, from Somalia, it can access the seas. We're talking about the Indian Ocean at this point, and then the one basically is Kenya also. Therefore, with this kind of situation, it is a landlocked nation, but she has the opportunity to use all the ports in those neighboring countries by law. Therefore, now we're going to go to the discussion, and I'm going to be here to supplement as an inductive energy to the education taught by Daniel Tigrai in his program. I may not go throughout, but I would actually accentuate the idea further. Okay? Include into some substance so we all can understand in what way Ethiopia can actually use the ports in Eritrea or its neighbors. As a matter of fact, here the yellow colors are all landlocked countries in Africa, and they all use their neighbors as transiting countries. Therefore, we go to the discussion right now.
Ethiopia is a landlocked country. Eritrea holds two ports on the Red Sea, Massawa and Assab. So today, I will try to answer a question that has become highly misunderstood, highly misrepresented, politicized, but it's a simple question. Can Ethiopia use Eritrean ports? I think the simple answer to that is yes.
But definitely, it has the right to use Eritrean ports. As I said before, all the ports of the neighboring countries, Ethiopia legally can use those ports. There is no fight in this.
If yes, how? And in order to answer that question, we actually have to cut through the noise, cut through the unrealistic claims coming from Ethiopia about Eritrea, sovereignty and so on, and actually focus on future generations. And in order to focus on future generations and whatever we propose on how the sports can be used, it has to be legal. It has to be safe for both countries. It has to be realistic. It has to be doable. And at the end of the day, it has to benefit both countries, Ethiopia and Eritrea. And if we look at this from the future generations' point of view, we actually have to think for the long term and start working on some trust-building strategies today. So today I will be bringing, it's not a question even about politics or who deserves what. It is actually about international law, logistics, economics, long-term stability and peace for the region and for future generations. What do I mean by that? I will explain. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the program. Start with the real question again, which is, can Ethiopia use Eritrean ports? And as I said earlier, the simple answer to that is yes. Based on what? Based on what Eritrea has been saying, not only in recent past, not only in the last decade or two, it's actually from Eritrea's independence, starting from that. And it has created on several occasions very favorable terms for Ethiopia to use it, but war and politics got in the way. And to this day,
there is no illusion in this situation that Eritrea had always been respectful of the laws of the seas. Therefore, Eritrea had always opened its ports for Ethiopia to use for mutual benefits. There has never been time that Eritrea resisted Ethiopia's usage of our ports. It was all about themselves switching from Eritrea to Djibouti. At the time, Meles Zenawi was running the country. And after that, everything was messed up. They didn't want to use our ports by their own choice.
We are where we are. But the answer to that remains that Ethiopia definitely can use Eritrean ports. But the key word to that is use. The key to that is just use it legally, like all nations do, like all landlocked countries do. Then if they use it the same way what Ethiopia has been using Djibouti ports for, or Somali ports for, or ports in Kenya. So the keyword is as simple as that, use. Okay, with that in mind, let's go to the how. And the how requires...
Actually, they're doing it legally, based on the United Nations laws of the seas. So can Ethiopia do the same thing with us, with the Eritreans? Did we stop them from using our ports based on international rules? I think this is a beautiful discussion. Let's keep going.
That it has to be done legally, it has to be done safely, and it has to be realistic. Now, especially the realistically part, I invite you to watch this video all the way through so you can judge for yourself if what I'm proposing here could be realistic. And more important enough, they have to be doable enough. And let's go into what I mean by legally and safely here as well. By legally, what I'm talking about is what I have been saying and what many others have been saying, what Eritrea has been saying for a long time, and it's not complicated. Of course, if you're not doing something legally, that means you're opting for something illegal. So illegal is not going to work. Illegal against the something that's against the international law, something that's done by force, and so on. So anyway, there could be many ways to gauge this, but it's as simple as you respect the UN Charter of Sovereignty. And the UN Charter is pretty simple. It applies for all countries, and it's not about ports and access to the sea. It's about the principle of respecting each other's territorial integrity.
Here we're talking about at least 44 or probably 45 countries classified as landlocked and using the ports of their neighbors. Therefore, definitely, they all must respect the UN Charter and AU border principles, laws of the sea. And that's what I'm here coming today to discuss, to accentuate, to extend this beautiful conversation into something substantial. Thank you.
So on. So that goes without saying. And it also goes respecting with the AU border principle in case of Africa.
What is he talking about here? Respecting UN Charter and AU border principles. Okay. Standard international port access agreements, paying normal port fees under Eritrea's full sovereignty. I think this is exactly how it should be.
Because the it's not that it is. If you have the UN chapter, the AU border principle is just an addition to that. But speaking of respecting each other's territory, respecting each other's sovereignty, if you are not respecting the UN Charter and the AU Charter, they are non-starters for the purpose of what we are talking about. Then whatever port agreements are, there's not going to be any fancy something that is only going to be applied to Ethiopia and Eritrea. It will be the standard international port access agreements all countries all over the world uses. So using the norms and practices of the civilized world.
Well, the only deal here is actually, of course, after you become friends, after you make agreements and all that, what is remained to be done is business. The business aspect of it, they can negotiate. They can negotiate for reductions, for other opportunities, for free access to certain items and stuff like that. But you cannot negotiate on the sovereignty of the country, which Ethiopia is demanding at this point, and Eritrea has no response to this day because it doesn't make sense. It cannot negotiate on its territory. Ethiopia can only use its ports by law.
As that. And another aspect to it is paying normal fees, because that's how, when as I mentioned in the beginning, Ethiopia is a landlocked country, and Eritrea has ports that Ethiopia can access. And in the situation, the normal relationship, the peaceful relationship, is for Ethiopia to pay a normal fee and for Eritrea to provide that that service if it chooses to.
Well, in the situation, once legalized agreement actually is done between the two countries, the rest is business. Business. What can Ethiopia give Eritrea? For it to get access to the sea through Assad or through Masab, everything costs money. But Ethiopia can have a lot of things to give Eritrea, basically in material substance, not in terms of cash only. For example, electricity and many other things that could be there to negotiate about, but they cannot negotiate on the ownership of the port by Ethiopians. Eritrea cannot take that routing at any cost because that will disintegrate the country as such. Therefore, it has to be legally abided. The rest, the business aspect of the connection, can be negotiated.
But while protecting its full sovereignty. So legally means as simple as that. Let's move on to the next topic of what would be like a prerequisite. And the other one is whatever it is, whatever solution we propose, it has to keep with peace and safety in mind. So what do I mean by safety? Without triggering any more tension. We know the rhetoric of politics and how it could trigger tension. We saw that the last couple of years. In fact, as we speak today, we are on that. Abiy Ahmed's campaign of whatever he chose to do for the last couple of years is actually triggering a lot of region, not only tension between Eritrea and Ethiopia, but creating more tensions for the region.
Well, so actually, by claiming Assad to be Ethiopian, has basically waged a war against Eritrea. In clear political science terms, I'm talking. War has been waged against Eritrea on its territory by the ambition, expansionist ambition of the guy in Addis Ababa.
So whatever new proposals we can come up with, it definitely should be able to solve that. And then in order for something to be done safely, it has to protect Eritrea's peace, borders, and sovereignty. You can't create something that is for the long term, that is for prosperity and peace and future generations in mind, by undermining Eritrea's rights, peace, its sovereignty, territorial integrity. We don't need to repeat it, but that's part of doing something safely. Another way of saying that is by not triggering another war. And then something to add to that is, once again, if we go back to the rule-based system legally, if there are conflicts and disagreements, there should be a way to prevent escalation. And if it is done within the auspices of the international norms and agreements, there are legal ways of resolving that. So part of that safety is a safety net that says we are doing this based on rules. Then the one that I mentioned earlier is, okay, how could this be done realistically? Okay, you be the judge by the end of this video, but what I will try to propose here is, first of all, because we are already in a low trust environment, to be realistic, it has to be done step by step. We can't be from where we are.
Well, I do appreciate this presentation so much, but at the same time, I got to stop here because I got to go to my subject matter as such. Of course, the gentleman has said the rules of the law actually govern the terms as to how the two countries relate to each other in view of the ports. To be realistic, step-by-step trust building over a decade, because there is no trust right now. Abiy Ahmed has destroyed the little trust that was actually hanging on between the two countries. Therefore, there is no trust because he wants to invade. He wants to colonize Eritrea using existing roads and logistic systems. Of course, that's all we can use at this point in time if we agree to work together, okay? Because that's all we have. Of course, in the long term, we can develop our roads, we can make a lot of things in there, actually railroads and many other things also. And then that can be done in both countries in a way that both countries can benefit out of this cooperation economically, time-wise, and peace-wise, matter of fact. But right now, I just want to go to the first criteria, which is the law. But what are we talking about when we talk about the law? Actually, right here, what exactly are we talking about? To the minimum, I like to present the two laws right here, ladies and gentlemen. Here are the two laws, okay? At least right of access of landlocked states to and from the sea and freedom of transit, Article 124. Okay? Use of terms for the purpose of this convention, it says landlocked state means a state which has no sea coast. In this case, Ethiopia, of course. B, transit state means a state with or without a sea coast situated between a landlocked state and the sea. So through whose territory traffic transit passes. Now we're talking about Eritrea in this situation, ladies and gentlemen. C, traffic in transit means transit of persons, baggage, goods, and means of transport across the territory of one or more transit states. That means Eritrea can actually give access to different parts of Ethiopia through its different ports. When the passage across such territory, with or without transshipment, warehousing, breaking bulk, or changes in the mode of transport. There are many different ways actually to give this service. It can be directly in one shot, or it can be through warehousing, breaking bulk, or other kind of transportations. It can be by cars, by trucks, even by planes for that matter, let alone by railroads, which means by trains. Basically, is only a portion of a complete journey which begins and terminates within the territory of the landlocked states. Here, ladies and gentlemen, they're talking about the transportation situation can be directly from the ports to the other country, it's Ethiopia, or actually through interrupted means. It doesn't matter here, there is no specifications. They can do it whatever way possible. D, means of transport means. Okay, for example, in I, they say railway rolling stock. C, lake and river craft and road vehicles. A lot of ways to do it. And actually, where local conditions or so require porters and pack animals, they can do it in many different ways. But the second one says landlocked states and transit states may, by agreement between them, include as means of transport pipelines and gas lines and means of transport other than those included in paragraph. I think the options are very clear here. They can do it in many different ways. For example, the Sudanese pipelines serve transportation of gasoline from South Sudan to Port Sudan, okay, and then everywhere in the world. So there are different ways of doing it, depending on what kind of resources both countries have. And now let's go to Article 125, which sets the condition, the legal condition, basically, as to how the two countries can work in this respect. Okay, right of access to and from the sea and freedom of transit. Number one, landlocked states shall have the right of access to and from the sea for the purpose of exercising the rights provided for in this convention, including those relating to the freedom of the high seas and the common heritage of mankind. I think here they're talking about high seas means anything beyond the the legal boundaries, sea boundaries of countries is called high seas, and that is owned by any country in the world. Ethiopia can have its naval forces in the high seas, for example. But she could have afforded. I don't think she can afford it, and it would be useless actually to have a navy right in the sea, somewhere where there is no one is claiming the seabed. Okay, no man's sea, no man's sea. Ethiopia can have some kind of access to that point, and then it can even build its own navy if it wants to. But I don't think too many countries can do that kind of thing. It's useless anyway. Useless, but anyway, that's what they're talking about in this situation. But Ethiopia must have access, okay, to the deep seas also. Okay, and then it must have the capacity to transport its goods by any means of transportation. And number 2 says, here is the catch. The term and modalities for exercising freedom of transit shall be agreed between the landlocked states and then transit states concerned through bilateral, sub-regional, or regional agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the catch. The catch is they're saying that there have to be international agreements, regional agreements, okay, or sub-regional agreements to do this kind of actually transactions, this kind of connection, business connections as such. But there are laws already in the United Nations Charter. There are laws as to how the transit state can deliver its ports for use by the landlocked states. And the final one says, okay, transit states in the exercising of their full sovereignty over their territory shall have the right to take all measures necessary to ensure that the rights and facilities provided for in this part for landlocked states shall in no way infringe their legitimate interests. Ladies and gentlemen, they're talking about the sovereignty issue, right? For Eritrea to deliver its ports for use only, to make them available for use by Ethiopians, Ethiopia must not infringe the sovereignty of the country. Therefore, Eritrea, by this law, has the right to act upon Ethiopia's aggressive tendencies, because the rule says that Ethiopia has to accept the Eritrean ports as Eritrean first before it can apply to use them and go into a business deal with the Eritrean government. Therefore, this is the rule. This is exactly where Abiy actually went out of the eye. He went out of the ship. Rules, out of the United Nations rules, out of the United Nations AU Charter, out of the ship, ladies and gentlemen. Politically speaking, therefore, I just came here to deliver this part of the missing part, which actually my brother Daniel said by law. And this is the law, the minimum law that Ethiopians and Eritreans must understand. Ethiopia can use the ports. Definitely, it has the right to use the ports. Eritrean ports in Eritrea cannot stop it, but it has to be abided by these laws at minimum. But in this situation, Abiy has actually broken the laws. He has broken the laws, ladies and gentlemen, because he doesn't even recognize Eritrea as a country. He is actually threatening Assad to take Assad because it is an authentic Ethiopian territory, historical territory, and this is not acceptable by Eritrea. And Eritrea at this point has the right, using the law, to stop Ethiopians from using the Eritrean port. Whatever, because their territorial integrity has been infringed by Ethiopia. Therefore, the Eritreans actually legally at this point cannot let Ethiopians use the ports. But in the long run, good government, and then if the trust is built between each other, a lot of things can be done. And I conclude my show today by just being and inductive energy. It is already substantial and important education provided by Daniel Tigrai. And I appreciate. Have a good day. You can put your comments here. I will follow that channel and I'll try to come here to supplement a little bit from the background. And ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to distribute. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Wow, wow.